After 2 decades of anarchy, an unlikely squire has done what none could before. He has drawn the sword from the stone. Drawing the sword from the stone is an indicator that he is the rightful king, yet many are his enemies, and he needs brave and hardy knights to help him defend his claim to the crown. Should you and your players take up the call of Arthur, the Boy King? Well, you're going to find out because I'll be sharing my review of Pendragon, the Boy King from Chaosium Inc. right after this. Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I'll be sharing my review of Pendragon, the Boy King from Chaosium Inc. This is written by the late, great Greg Stafford with David Larkins and David Zeman. The 286-page hardcover with PDF is slated to start arriving in stores in early September. It's going to carry an MSRP, I believe, of $59.99, which will make me guess that the accompanying PDF alone should be around $29.99. Having said that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Pendragon, the Boy King. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Chaosium Inc. were kind enough to put this in my hands at this past week's Gen Con. And if you happen to see my interview with Brian Holland of Chaosium Inc., I mentioned that I was going to shoot a first look video, maybe do it live on the Gaming Gang Dispatch. Well, it turns out I ended up having to leave Gen Con early this year, so I had more time on my hands, so I decided, you know what? I am going to dive on in and read The Boy King. So this is a review, not a first look. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, if you're kind of curious why I had to leave Gen Con early this year, I am going to be sharing a recap of Gen Con tonight on the Gaming Gang Dispatch. So you can always tune in, or of course, if you're watching this after I've posted this a few days later, you can always go back and check out that episode of the live show. Anyway, let's get back to the Boy King, because neither I nor anyone else have received any other sort of compensation outside of this review copy in order to provide you with this review. We're also not going to be looking at each and every page of the book. And got to keep in mind, this is an adventure campaign. So if you're a player, there are going to be some minor spoilers ahead. I'm going to say mainly spoiler free, but I am going to talk about some aspects of the Great Pendragon Campaign and the early years, which are contained in this book. So please keep that in mind. I just want to warn you right up front. Now, of course, if your game master has been kicking around, picking up the Boy King, let them know about this review. That way they can approach this and make a far more informed buying decision. So I will point out that there is an error with this book, and it has to do with the credits page. Wrong credits page. It is actually for the Noble's Handbook, not the Boy King. And funny enough, you know what? I have not reviewed the Noble's Handbook. In fact, for some oddball reason, there's a short little blip on the radar here that I did not receive some review copies from Chaosium Inc. I am going to reach out because I definitely want to share a review of the Noble's Handbook. And I'll be very honest, folks at Chaosium Inc. probably don't realize that I don't have a review copy of that and a few other releases that had come out. Anyway, back to the book. So this is an update of the Great Pendragon Campaign, which is a famed role-playing game campaign. And I read the either it was the original or the second edition. And wow, I was just blown away. Now, that was one volume. This is going to be 3 volumes. Personally, I think it might be 4, but I've been told 3. And it will clock in, as far as the total of pages, around 1,000 pages. So that is a ton of gaming. Now, inside the Boy King, we are covering from the years 510 to 528. So a period of 19 years. So from the point Arthur draws the sword from the stone, which some people may not realize is not Excalibur. He gets Excalibur from the Ladies of the Lake. So you want to keep in mind that this is actually built off of not only Le Morte d'Arthur from Thomas Malory, but also the romances of English and French poets that came later. So there's a lot going on here that if you are not like an expert in the Arthurian legends, you're going to be pretty surprised by. And I feel that I'm pretty well versed, and there's a lot in here. I'm like, oh, wow. I've never heard of those, or at least I don't remember various different nights and various different events. So each year is going to follow a specific format. Before I get to that format, I will point out there are 2 periods taking place here. The first is the early Boy King period. So these are the years following Arthur drawing the sword from the stone. In fact, he draws the sword from the stone multiple times to prove to different people that, yes, he is the rightful king. And there are still many rulers out there who do not believe it, who have arrayed themselves against Arthur. So the early portion of the campaign is defending Arthur's claim to the crown. So there are a lot of battles. I will say that this, in my opinion, skews a little heavier into battles than maybe I would look to do. But I should also mention that this gives a lot of leeway into the sort of campaign that you can run if you're more interested in the pursuit of glory and being involved in different battles. You certainly have the opportunity for that. If you're looking for a game that's going to be more about courtly intrigue, then of course you've got the possibility for that as well. So I really do appreciate the fact that there's so much going on and there's so many different angles that you can take, that one person's The Boy King is going to be far, far different than someone else's campaign. Very, very nice. But as far as the battles and that, we will get breakdowns of important things that are taking place. You can make the battles as detailed or as abstract as you want. Of course, there are rules in the core book for mass battles. We've got a lot of them sprinkled throughout because early on in Arthur's reign, everyone is looking to take him on, to knock him off the throne, at least up until the conquest period, when Arthur then sets out to conquer other places. Like, he goes to Italy. I don't recall in the different stories and legends that I've read about Arthur leaving Britain to conquer other areas. Pretty wild. And that is included in this too. So let's pick just one year, and I will share with you what the format is. Of course, now that I'm looking for one, here we go. So the format's going to start off with information that the players should be aware of or that they can easily find out. So every year we'll start with the Pentecost court, and depending on the year will be where the court is held. So the Pentecost court starts off our adventuring year, and then the Christmas court will wrap up the adventuring year. And of course, in Pendragon, we have a lot of things going on in our downtime when the knights are not out adventuring. that you want to track, their estates, family, things like that. There's a lot cooking. Of course, those rules are in the core rule book. Something else I should mention, you can run the Boy King using only the starter set and the pre-generated characters. It is a possibility. Personally, I would say I'd probably aim to create new characters for this campaign, which of course you can't do with what's in the starter set for a few different reasons. Number one, it's recommended that the players all be household knights of a Count Robert, who becomes very close friends with the king, which provides the opportunity for the player characters to be present at these courts at very important events, because Count Robert is a mover and shaker, and the player character knights are important members of his household. So I definitely like that. I think that is very, very cool. And as far as the pre-generated characters in the starter set, I think there's only one who really fits into that. So we're going to start off with the Pentecost Court. We'll get some quotes from various different entities. We'll get information about any special guests who happen to be at the court. We will see the introduction of characters that you are very familiar with, such as Sir Gawain, who will begin making their appearances throughout. So very, very well done there. So we're going to get that court. Then we're going to get various different adventures that are taking place throughout the year. Now, some years only have a few pages devoted to them. Other years have quite a few pages devoted to them because there is a lot going on. There's also a lot going on that you may not be aware of, such as the Dolorous Stroke and Sir Balin and Sir Balin. It's recommended as a game master that you simply skim through this book to start off with, and then delve into the year as well as the next year or two as far as the campaign goes, to understand where the foreshadowing is going to take place, because there are a lot of things that are going to lead into other things years down the line. In fact, some people may not realize that Mordred is not the son of Arthur and Morgan Le Fay. Sure, it's that way in a lot of movies, but that is not actually the case. So there are actually things going on early on during the period of the Boy King, which is going to be sowing the seeds of Camelot's downfall later on. Pretty wild. We have the establishment of the Wasteland, which is what truly brings about the need for the Grail Quest, which I believe is probably going to be our third book, probably wrapping up the campaign here. I've been told there's 3 volumes. I'm curious if we might have an additional volume outside of that with the years before Arthur becomes king, because that was part of the Great Pendragon Campaign. So the first portion of that book is Uther Pendragon. It is not Arthur as the king yet. The second volume in the series is going to be The High King. So what you're going to see are various different adventures that are taking place during the year, and various different important battles that may take place. Something to keep in mind if you're not overly familiar with Pendragon, the way their campaigns are laid out, every single adventure is not presented as a full-fledged, fully statted, here's the stat blocks for all the NPCs and such, like a lot of people are used to seeing with published role-playing game adventures. Sure, we do have that. In fact, we've got some adventures that wrap up this book, but many of the adventures that are contained within are going to provide the game master with some set pieces to roll out. So it is very, very possible in a game session of, say, 4 hours that the player knights engage in a few different adventures. They may actually tackle an entire year in just a single 4-hour game session. And then, of course, there are other periods where you're going to have far more adventuring taking place. So we're going to move into the conquest period. And I'll be very honest, I don't remember reading about Arthur going to Italy on campaign. That's in here. I'm like, wow, I did not ever read that. So I thought that was pretty wild. Something else, keep in mind, there are a lot of NPCs. There are a lot of movers and shakers throughout this campaign whose names are very, very similar. So as a game master, you want to stay on your toes as far as that goes. So let's talk a little bit about the production quality. Our paper stock, once again, excellent. All of the Pendragon books have this same paper stock. It is very nice matte finish. The artwork throughout has kind of been bumped up a little bit. And this is something that Brian Holland talked about in our interview. Some people have kind of not dug some of the line artwork that we have seen in the earlier releases of this edition of Pendragon. That line art is gone. So that is no longer part, well, I can't say it's gone forever, but it is not part of the Boy King. The maps and that, just really, really nicely done. So here's Rome, because Arthur visits Rome. And of course, there are various different ways that are included in here for the player knights to be part of all of these expeditions with Arthur the King. Because remember, they came on board early on. Their liege, Count Robert, is a great friend of Arthur. So that's why they're present for a lot of these things. Really, really nicely done. Very cool how various different threads run through the Boy King to really tie the player knights into this campaign, where all of this will begin to feel very personal for the player knights. Definitely dig that. So this is the final year here. And then we're going to get into some more detailed adventures. So we're going to wrap up with some adventures. These are the short little adventure portions here. So I'll give you an example of one of those. Let's go. The Adventure of the Ruined Villa tells us when can it take place. So this is any year during the Roman War, 525 to 528. The setting, countryside of Gaul or Italy, a ruined Roman villa amid fields, vineyards, or low hills. Characters are the player knights, Roman soldiers, and Roman civilians, landowners, servants, and slaves. What is the problem? While scouting, patrolling, or moving through contested territory, the player knights come upon a ruined Roman villa. Smoke rises from the collapsed roof, and the sound of shouting carries across the fields. A detachment of Roman soldiers is using the villa as a temporary strong point, looting what remains and rounding up civilians found hiding in cellars, outbuildings, and nearby fields, and so on and so forth. So we get some information. Well, the player knights can approach it by attacking outright. They might try to surprise the Roman troops. They might try to escort the civilians to safety, holding out the Romans long enough for the innocents to flee. Also talks about, okay, this is a combat encounter. So this is an example of the adventures that are sprinkled throughout. There are loads and loads of these. That also means that the game master has to kind of delve into these a little bit more and flesh these out. So that means this is a bit more challenging for game masters out there. I would think that you want to have a bit of experience as a game master under your belt before you tackle the Boy King. Now, saying that, I mean, maybe you've run some other Pendragon adventures in the past. Maybe you've run the Grey Knight, which has the breakdown the same way as this book does, where you've got a lot of different kind of set pieces going on that are up to the game master to flesh out. And then we also have adventures here that go into more detail, where these are presented more like a traditional role-playing game adventure would be, where we've got the various different scenes that are going on and the different stat blocks and so forth. So that is going to take us to nearly the end of the book, and we are going to wrap up with some new stat blocks. We do have an appendix here, secret relationships. So it goes into some detail about that, such as being involved with a married person and how it can play out for each of the individuals. Kind of interesting there. And then we'll get into our new battle foes. And then we have a nice detailed index to wrap up the book. So that is a peek inside Pendragon, the Boy King from Chaosium Inc. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. Gotta say, production quality-wise, fantastic. As we've seen with the Pendragon line, really nice paper stock. This book is going to hold up really nicely at the game table, and it needs to, because it is just overflowing with Arthurian gaming goodness. I will tell you that. I gotta say, it does skew a little heavier into battles than I would prefer, because I probably wouldn't go the route of kind of a military role-playing campaign, which you're not forced to, don't get me wrong, but I would have liked to have seen a little more page space devoted to the courtly goings-on and the other adventures taking place, as opposed to a lot of battles and getting into a lot of detail about the battles. And of course, what the player knights are going to experience or take part in during the battles. I wouldn't like completely avoid the military aspect of it, because that's what knights are for. But like I said, I think it skews a little heavier than I would like. But really, that's kind of my only critique as far as this book goes. Artwork throughout, really dig it. That line artwork that there were a good number of people who weren't too keen on. We don't have any of that present in this volume. I can't tell you for sure that it's gone for good, but at least it is not in The Boy King. This is really cool stuff. There's a lot of things that I learned, and I thought, hey, you know, I'm pretty up on the Arthurian legends. And I'm like, wow, really? Whoa, really? So I thought that was very cool. Something else I want to point out, even though Pendragon, the Boy King, is obviously set up and statted for Pendragon, I could easily see game masters out there utilizing this book for other role-playing games. Now, of course, you're not just going to segue right into, say, high fantasy like Dungeons and Dragons with this, but if you made some tweaks, I could easily see utilizing this with other role-playing game systems, because so much of this is just presented as this is what's going on. These are the options a player knights may have. They may decide to go in this direction, do this, as opposed to, okay, here's stat blocks. Here are specific skills that are going to be part of the challenge. These are specific passions. Now, are those things present? Yes, of course, but not all of the various different adventures and set pieces that are going on require that. So like I said, this would make for tons and tons of inspiration for game masters out there who may not happen to be running Pendragon. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Pendragon, the Boy King from Chaosium Inc. a 9 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. If you enjoyed the Gaming Gang, would like to support the outlet, check out the show notes. There are a variety of ways that you can help out the outlet. And of course, even Down in those show notes, there's an invite link to our Discord server. It's free to sign up. Be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are never going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. And until I see you next time, certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.